Welcome to the Flowering Daydream podcast, where daydreams become reality. I'm your host, Charlene Windus, and today we are going to talk about boundaries. What are boundaries? How can you engage in boundaries? What are healthy boundaries? Where are you at with your boundaries? And we're also going to do a collective reading for each astrological sign that will include a little guidance on how to strengthen or develop your boundaries. I thought it might be kind of fun to incorporate a reading. It offers a little bit of support, but when we do a collective reading for a large general demographic like that, there's always something in the reading that will apply or resonate with you. Readings are never black and white, and there's always room for interpretation, resonance, and little seeds to blossom later on in your psyche. And I think what another really interesting thing is as we go through each of the signs for that reading, that everything for each sign will apply to you in some way. And when we're doing something as specific as reading on guidance on how to deepen or strengthen boundaries, everything that is said for every sign will have some nugget of wisdom for you that you can leave or take. So, as always with readings, you just take what resonates and leave the rest. But before we get started in the episode, I have some updates that I wanted to share with you. First off, I just wanted to express my gratitude for all the listeners who have let me know how much they're enjoying the podcast and learning from the episodes, and just extend a really big heartfelt thank you for just all the amazing responses I'm receiving from everyone who has reached out. And it really kind of hit home for me when I had a conversation with a listener who said she was looking for a spiritual class to sign up for, but she found the podcast first and decided that the podcast would be her class. And that's kind of amazing because that was my goal, to provide something to listeners that you could receive for free. That's a community offering and a way to balance the spiritual inequality when it comes to money and needing, money to expand spiritually and to grow, which you don't. You can do a lot of that in nature and with your own spiritual team and things like that. But I felt like having the podcast really called to me, as that was one of those primary reasons, was to have a community resource where you actually learn something, not just a bunch of chatting, which is why I like to get right into the episodes. I don't really talk a lot about anything that's not related to the episode because I want the content to be direct. But if you feel called to support the podcast financially, you can click on the link in the show notes and donate to the podcast. It does cost to archive, the content and to post the content, and it takes many, many hours to create the outlines, do the editing, recording, producing, line up interviews, things like that. So donations are greatly appreciated. But you can also support the podcast by leaving a review, sharing the podcast with a friend, or just simply by listening. And then lastly, I'm still without music as I wait to see if my new favorite artist's song will be released as podcast intro music. And it may not be, and I'll have to find a new intro song, but I am trying to be patient and I am waiting and waiting and waiting. And for me, that's very challenging. Patience is not one of my specialties. It's something I consciously have to work on. But I'm going to wait because it'll be worth the wait if I can get her song on here. So I've contacted her team and I haven't heard anything back. So I just have to wait and see if it shows up, where you can buy podcast intro music. So until then, it will remain silent at the beginning and the end of the episodes. So let's dive into boundaries. This has been such a huge learning curve for myself, and I will most likely be working on this for the rest of my life. But, I've learned a lot and I've applied a lot and I've tested a lot in this avenue. And having an awareness and an engagement in healthy boundaries is one of the most important things you can do to maintain good energy hygiene and maintain sovereignty over your own body, mind, and spirit. It also protects your vital life force energy. We have a finite amount of energy each day. And if we lend it out and give it out and release all of our energy, then we're fatigued before we should be. And we don't have enough for ourselves. And if we can't be healthy and full of our own vital life force energy, then we're not really able to help others or support others or really partake in anything outside of ourselves. So with good boundaries, we can be aware of when we are lending our energy, which is our power, and we can decide consciously who and what we allow in our energetic atmosphere with boundaries. and let others know where we begin and where we end so that they know how to respond to us. They know where they stand with us. And most people don't really have an awareness of boundaries. I often find myself teaching others by my example, and sometimes it's interpreted as negative, or maybe they perceive it as I don't like them, or they take it personal, or they apply their own projections onto me. But with boundaries, this is something that you have to be okay with, like starting right now. You just have to be okay with that. And you have to just not really care about that aspect of it. Like, however, someone else responds to you is their problem, not yours. Your job is to uphold your boundaries and stand firm in those boundaries, and how they're perceived and received is not your problem. One of my teachers, I love the saying that she gives. She says, it's either your business, God's business, or someone else's business. And so I think about that a lot with my boundaries, and that helps me kind of keep myself in check. So you have to find your own little, mantras or mission statements or, whatever feels good to you to kind of help keep yourself in check when it comes to boundaries. But you also have to just be okay with not being liked all the time. And that was a big one for me. That was really difficult. I had a really, kind of tumultuous childhood, and I went to all these different schools, 17 schools, before I ended up dropping out and going to community college, where I got my high school diploma after a 6-month program there. But I was constantly being moved. And so I had to constantly make friends, blend in, seem harmonious with my environment. And so instead of being able to express what my needs were and be who I really was confidently, I didn't really get the opportunity to do that, because at those school ages, you're more concerned with being accepted than you are with accepting yourself most of the time. And so that really put a big dent in creating boundaries. And so you have to think about your programming, your family upbringing, your school experience, just all of these things are what creates or not creates these boundaries in ourselves. The great thing is once you grow up and become an adult, you get to change, you get to transform, you get to grow and evolve, and you get to heal. And that's the great thing about life, is that it's so fluid in that regard. So the very first time that I actually even became aware that I did not have a boundary, I didn't have any boundaries really, was when I met my friend, my first mentor and teacher and friend, Heather. Shout out to Heather. She hilariously pointed out my lack of boundaries. We worked together, and she just looked at me one day and said, "You have no boundaries." She just said it like super direct. And I laughed so hard, but I also enjoyed her point, blunt directness. I really appreciate that. It's one of my favorite qualities in a friend or another person. And just be direct. I love it. I don't have to agree with you, but I appreciate the directness. And when someone's that direct with me, even if I don't agree with it, or I'm defensive, in the beginning, I will go home and consider what you said. I've always been this way. And I will go home, I will evaluate myself, do a little self-evaluation. I might ask, someone close to me that loves and cares about me, that I trust, what their view is on me in that regard. And I'll seriously, mull it over. I'll really think about it. And then if I'm like, no, I don't agree with them, then I have a firm stance with that. But often these point blank, blunt, direct experiences that I've had in my life have been really incredible teaching moments, really amazing growth opportunities. And some of them have really changed my life tremendously in the most positive way. So be open to that, and think about that as an option to your growth and your evolution. So after that, I came back to work after I did my little process of that. And she really intrigued me after that. And I wanted to know everything that she knew. And at that point she became my mentor, my teacher, and now we've been friends for years. But it was an amazing eye-opening moment in terms of boundaries. So as we go into this episode a little deeper, just prepare to feel uncomfortable, and allow yourself to be in that discomfort. That's the best recommendation I could give you, because that is the most difficult thing about boundaries, and assessing where your boundaries are at, and also engaging them and employing them, is it's uncomfortable. It's actually not comfortable. And for me, my whole life was about creating harmony and being harmonious. And so This was a challenge for me. So you learn to listen and observe and, just take what resonates, leave what doesn't, as usual in the podcast. Clear yourself energetically after the show, whether it's with smoke, spray, or sound. But realize that you can't clear away your own stuff that needs your attention, your own discomfort. So I want to make a clear distinction between clearing and cleansing your energy from things that are ready to be released and let go versus just being uncomfortable and not liking it. You can't clear that away. The discomfort is a messenger. It's a teacher and it's an illuminator. But if you find anything that needs to be cleared after this episode, definitely give yourself a good energy clearing. So I like to give you guys examples of myself to help illuminate a lesson or give light to a learning experience. And if one person benefits from that, then I feel like I've done my job in this episode here. So as I said previously, your upbringing is your programming to these boundaries. Your childhood is where these get programmed. And my background with my parents was very unsteady, unstable, but I had no boundaries. There were zero. My mom was 19 when she met my dad and got pregnant. My dad was 26. My mom was just a teenager, right? And my dad's mom encouraged him to marry my mom for custody rights, but my dad also said that he wanted to marry my mom. And soon after she got pregnant and they got married, and then they got divorced when I was about 8 months old. So after that, it was pretty chaotic throughout my childhood. I lived with my mom, but I saw my dad on the weekends, holidays, and summers. But I stayed with my grandmother, my dad's mom, and he would come and visit me there. So I got to have this like stable, loving environment on weekends, summers, and holidays with my grandmother. But I was still with my mom during the week, and not my grandma, not my mom, not my dad put out any boundaries whatsoever. So no one taught me a single boundary, not about my body, my mind, my emotions, or my energy. Not about finances, not about school, not about people, nada, nothing. So, as a kid, this actually seemed really fun to me. When I was living it, it was like I could have candy for dinner, I didn't have a bedtime. My mom was buying alcohol and cigarettes for me when I was 14 years old. I had no like school requirements. I mean, they told me not to skip school and to go to school, but there wasn't any enforcement on that. And I think, I don't know what it was like for my parents. It was probably really difficult. And I do believe that parents do like the best that they can with what they have at that time. So I don't think anyone goes out there intentionally as a parent and goes, okay, I'm going to like ruin this, my kid. I don't think that's the mindset or the intention, but it's just where things are at and how things went. And so we moved a lot, and mostly due to my mom's paranoia. And she had some self sabotaging patterns. I don't really know, again, what was going on for her that made her make those decisions ultimately, but she was a single mom. She had a traumatic history herself. She didn't really escape those lingering patterns. And when I was 4 years old, my mom had another child, a sister with a different dad. And when I was 15, I got another sister with a different dad from my mom as well. My mom was married 5 times and divorced. And there was just, I guess it was just about survival for my mom. So she wasn't really thinking about anything beyond survival. She had never really tended to her own emotional, capacity and boundaries and needs and things like that. But, our days were not a typical day. And so, when I say we had no boundaries and these boundaries were not created, my mom would have us climb in dumpsters when we were little kids to grab cans to recycle. We took things out of dumpsters from swap meets to resell at the following weekend swap meet. We sold homemade bird houses. My mom made like these balloon filled gifts. She made homemade jam that we would sell on the side of the road. When I was 8 years old, I remember living in Lakewood, Tacoma in an apartment with cockroaches. And my mom would send me around to these various apartments, and she'd wait in the car, and then I would knock on the door and ask people to exchange food stamps for money, or we would sell cookies that were homemade and wrapped in saran wrap, and people would feel bad and they would buy some. So, looking back, it's like anyone could have kidnapped me. There's just no boundaries. My mom would wake us in the middle of the night, and we would trespass on other people's property and dig these nightcrawler worms that she would sell to the fishermen, the next day. My mom had a quick temper, and so I became pretty harmonious to avoid upset. And also being put in constant dangerous situations, I learned to be really hyper vigilant. So that's where, that trauma response was developed. And I was offered by the courts constantly to go live with my grandma, who was always fighting for custody of me. But I turned it down every time the judge asked me because I knew my mom would let me do whatever I wanted. And even though I felt more safe and more stable at my grandparents' house, I felt this ultimate freedom at my mom's. And honestly, someone should have made that decision for me, but they didn't. That's neither here nor there. But I give you a little bit of this background so that you can understand. For me, there was zero boundaries because on the weekends, the summers, and the holidays, when I went to the safety and security of my grandparents to see my dad, I would get to go shopping for new clothes, get my hair done, and experience a pretty normal environment. And so it's like I kind of lived in two worlds. We went on trips to Disneyland and Montana, Whidbey Island, but there were no rules at my grandma's. It was sort of like she just wanted me to be really happy when I was there. She understood the circumstances at my mom's were pretty awful. And so it was sort of like she didn't want to put up a boundary because she just wanted me to have, as much contentness as I could have to balance things out when I was there with her. So she thought she was doing the right thing by not, having those boundaries. My mom thought she was doing the right thing because she was just in survival mode. I just think that she was so stuck in her own trauma and traumatic response patterns and just trying to survive, she wasn't able to see that there were no boundaries at all anywhere. I started my first job when I was 14 with my mom at a cafe in Wisconsin, illegally, of course. I was paid under the table. And then I moved out and I lived with various friends until I was about 15. And then I did a short stint at my dad's for the first time ever. I lived with him. Then I ran away from there. And then I worked illegally again at Applebee's in Florida, serving alcohol when I was only 16, which they finally found out about that and fired me. This was after I got fired from another job for bringing my boyfriend brought alcohol into the place where I worked while I was cleaning, and everyone that was cleaning and closing was drinking, and somebody found out about it, so they fired us all. Anyway, this is a long, long, long time ago. And then I had to pay my rent and didn't have the money. So I was living in a state away from all of my family and I had to pay my rent. After that moment, I went back to my apartment and I was like, okay, I gotta go home. I gotta change my life around. I gotta go finally live with my grandmother who's wanted me to be with her this whole time anyway and change my life. This is not the life for me. Like that was such a huge wake up call. And of course, my teenage years were very tumultuous given that I had no discipline, no support, no boundaries, all those things were missing. So I finally moved in with my grandmother and I enjoyed all of our time together. I did everything I could to break patterns in my family and myself. I went back to school and my life really turned around from there. And there's a lot I'm leaving out in this whole like life history story. And maybe I'll dive into it some more in another episode. But I want to give you the context here to zero boundaries. And it might be different for each of you. You might have had a stable childhood, but you might have had one parent that was a particular way or two parents that were a particular way. It doesn't take a big tumultuous childhood or traumatic experiences to create lack of boundaries. That it can be created simply by overextension patterns or being told that you always need to be harmonious and quiet and pleasing. So there's a lot of ways that these boundary patterns can occur without having, a background like this. So the downside to that, my childhood was insane anxiety, PTSD, and a trauma history. But the upside is I have excellent marketing skills and communication skills. I have an insane psychic intuitive ability to read people and spirits. And I've lived and learned a lot, giving me the ability to relate to others in their healing journey. So, yes, that was challenging, but I wouldn't be where I am now in terms of offering you everything that I offer you on this podcast if I didn't have this background. And so that's how it illuminates this episode. I also find that my judgment is really limited to subconscious patterns. Like, I feel like I was exposed to so many different ways of living and so many different kinds of people that nothing surprises me. Nothing ever makes me think twice about someone. I feel like I'm just with other humans, whether you're whether you're climbing in a dumpster or living in luxury. I just don't care. It doesn't make you any less or more of a person. And I've really not ever put that into words before, so maybe it isn't coming out right, but I think you get my point. So what do we do now? What do we do when we become adults? How do we make our own decisions, create a new path, transform, change, grow, evolve, heal, expand, all of those things? So I'm going to break it down one by one, and I'm going to give you some examples of some things that you can try. And if you already have great boundaries, you probably wouldn't still be listening to this episode, but maybe you'll find something here too. So let's talk about the yes no boundary first. And I just want to throw it out there that all the boundaries that I'll be covering in this episode are available in my course on Udemy under the spiritual and energetic hygiene. And this is the whole section on boundaries that I'm sharing with you. So if someone asks you to do something, but you really don't want to do it, or you're tired or overwhelmed, maybe you do want to do it, but you're just too tired, or whatever the reason is, or your feelings, we have to be able to say no and not feel bad about it. So let's say it's a good friend or someone you care about, and they ask you to do something and you really don't want to do it, but you say yes anyway, and you go anyway. When we do that, we're overextending our energy. We're overstepping our vital life force communication. We want to listen to ourselves. We want to listen to that gut feeling and the way our body is talking, and be okay with saying no. Saying no is actually a spiritual act, which will come up in the collective reading that I'll be doing on the podcast today. You can say things like no thank you, or I'll take a rain check, or maybe another time, or no. Whatever you really want to say, you can say it. There's nothing wrong with saying the word no. And you don't have to explain yourself at all. This took me forever to do, and I sometimes trip up and do it anyway. Like, you don't have to say the why. All you have to do is say the no. And how they respond to it is their problem. They don't like it, or they're bothered by it, or they internalize it, or whatever they do, that's for them to deal with, not you. Your job is to engage in your boundary and say no. Their stuff is their stuff, and our stuff is our stuff. And sometimes we comply or say yes because we're scared to lose that person as a friend, or we're scared to be alone, or we're scared to upset them because we don't want to lose that friendship or that relationship. And I went through a couple of years myself of not having a community because I wanted a new one. I wanted people who operated with boundaries and had a healthy sense of self. I was tired of compromising who I was at other people's expense. And trust me, it was worth the 2-year wait. I finally found an amazing new group. I found more than one person that I wanted in my life, that filled my life up, that were reciprocal in our relationship dynamics, that were mature enough to not be hurt if I said no or expressed an authentic truth to them. And it was worth the wait. So you have to be okay with sort of this purging that might occur if you start saying no. And here's the thing about boundaries is, like, everyone in your family and friend circle right now is used to you the way that you are now. And when you start making a change in the boundaries, it feels drastic. It appears drastic to other people, and harsh and rough, and just almost like a cold feeling. That's how it can be perceived. That's actually not it at all. It's an empowering thing. It's a healthy thing, and it protects your energy and your vital life force, and it allows you to really assess yourself, what your needs are and what you're able to give and where. And then there's more quality in the relationship dynamics that you have when you're able to have that unconditional attention and offer that unconditional energy when you're able to. And it goes the other way too. So say yes when you want to say yes. Sometimes we don't speak up or say yes when we mean yes for the fear of judgment in some way too. So we have to release the fear of judgment and realize that freedom resides in a judgment-free mind and heart. So say no when you want to say no. Say yes when you want to say yes. You don't have to explain yourself, and you don't have to worry about how other people are taking that. If you want to, if it's someone really close to you and they're really upset and they don't understand what's going on, you can say something like, I'm working on my boundaries, and this is one of the areas that I am challenged and I am improving and growing and evolving, and it might be a little messy, but I just want you to know that I don't love you any less. You're important to me, but this is what I need to show up for myself and to show up for you properly. Something like that. It doesn't have to sound exactly like that. Make it your own. But you get what I'm saying. It's your job to know and state your needs. So if you're in a relationship, it's not their job to guess. It's your job to say, I like this, I don't like this. Those are boundaries. Like, even down to the littlest thing, like ordering food. Like, this is my favorite one to share with everyone because it's so simple. But let's say you've been with someone repeatedly and they say, do you want Italian or Chinese for dinner? And you say, I don't care, but you actually do care. And you're not really stating your needs because you don't think it's that big of a deal because it's such a minor thing about food and you like both. Okay. But then you're not speaking your authentic truth, even on as little as something as this. And so you say, actually, I'd like Italian, or actually, I'd like Chinese. You really need, your needs can change too, and they can be fluid. They're not locked in, and you might feel differently the next time somebody asks. But another example would be if you don't like to go to parties or drink or be in large groups and you prefer one-on-one or private small groups or not drinking at all, or whatever the thing is, you have to be really clear and upfront with your new friends or your new relationships or your existing friends and family and relationships. Be very clear. Don't make excuses or reasons. They don't need to know the why. They only need to know the boundary. So honesty is the best policy here. I like being in large groups. I don't like being in large groups. That doesn't work for me. This does work for me. And this was a big one for me because I'm super hyper vigilant and aware and, constantly monitoring my environment. And it was too overwhelming for me to be in large groups until I was much older and had a lot of therapy and learned a lot and realized that I was just downloading the energy of everyone in the space, due to my childhood programming. And that's why it was so overwhelming. So then I learned how to stop downloading everyone's energy and how to protect my own energetic atmosphere. And then I was able to put up a boundary and go to an environment where there are lots of people and have a successful time if I wanted to. It's still not my favorite thing or my preference. I prefer, more one-on-one or 2 or 3 people versus large groups, but I can do it now and I can have success with it. So the more you learn about yourself and pay attention and follow, and deepen your exploration of yourself and whatever healing might need to take place, then you're able to identify your preferences. So an easy one that everybody could do right now, is a soul nourishment boundary. So who and what are you reading, following, and listening to, and why? And is it soul nourishing? So when you open up your feed on your social media, is it filling you up? Is it heart-centered? Are you learning or growing? Do you feel at peace? Do you feel educated? Do you feel a new awareness? Do you like what you see? It can be whatever you want, but are you enjoying it? And is it benefiting you in some way positively, right? Because if it's not, if you feel drained or shameful or guilty or a lack of control or fearful or scared or depressed or anxious in what you're reading, there may be something there that needs an examination for sure from you. But you don't want to be in that space 24 hours a day when you open up your social media. You want to feel expanded, educated, peaceful, or neutral at the bare minimum. So you don't want to have something draining your life force energy. So for example, I follow a lot of educators in psychology and therapy and spirituality. So I know when I pull up my feed, I have a sense of connection, refill, and recharge, and therapy, and that's what I like. Maybe for you, it's a bunch of cooking, recipes and things to follow. Maybe it's comedy where you open it up and you laugh a lot. Maybe it's a learning, where you're following various educators so that you can learn more about something. So take a look at your social media and what you're reading and what you're watching. And does it call to you? Does it resonate with you? Is it benefiting you in those areas that I mentioned? And if it's not, delete it. Go through and delete it. You need an energetic and spiritual boundary online too. And don't engage with, it's hard not to, but don't engage with people who want to just suck your energy online. If it's a meaningful learning moment, go for it. But if it's not, think about it. Think about where is your boundary with that soul nourishment, particularly in dealing with social media. But it also goes with what you're reading and what you're watching. I check in with the news and try to be aware. In fact, I have this amazing person that I follow on TikTok. It's on Instagram and TikTok. It's called Under the Desk News. And they have regular news, but it's quick and direct. And I like that style. But also my favorite is banana shirt, good news only. And they put on a banana shirt and they give you good news. And I'm like, yes, this is what I need, like a good news outlet. And I just really like their personality and their energy and all of that. And it's delivered in a way that I feel good, even when it's not the good news when I'm watching it or listening to it. So that's something to think about. Where are you getting your updates from? And then the next one is the self-care boundary. This is about making sure that you're drawing a boundary with yourself. Are you resting, hydrating, eating well, moving your body? Are you getting to your annual exams every year? Are you going to bed when you're tired? Are you walking, breathing? What do you feel like laying on the couch all weekend? Do it. Are you asking for help if you need help? Just not expecting others to know what you need, but knowing what you need. Where's your mental load boundary? Where's your physical load boundary? Where's your emotional boundary? Where's your spiritual boundary? So just really, taking some time to assess what that is and where you can make some positive changes in your self-care boundary. And then we have the fear boundary. So fear is like a natural part of life. And in fact, sometimes it's beneficial and helpful. But when we drop into fear and we stay there for too long, we open our energy to being depleted, we lend our energy to fear, and we require a long recovery period. So what is fear? Generally, fear is the outcome of the unknown. And I'm not talking about, insane stuff. I'm talking about fearing just everyday normal stuff that you might lend your energy to, like not doing something for the fear of the outcome, judgment, or acceptance, or fear of traveling on a plane and not being able to go anywhere. Things like that. It's about communicating with fear as a messenger, as an energy bringing a message and going, okay, what is this really rooted in? And what is it that I really need to address? And paying attention to that, because we're lending our energy when we drop into that fear energy for long periods of time. And then we have the equanimity and reciprocity boundary. So this is about having equal reciprocal relationships. This is about not overextending. This is about you always being the space holder. This is about an equal energy exchange, and what's really difficult with this one, I think, is our family, because we can't abandon them for not having equanimity with us or reciprocity, but we can teach our family members what we need. We can state our needs and we can draw the boundary and we can say, this is what I need. And if you can't say it like that, or it can't be done like that, your actions can show the boundary. And so you just have to pay attention to when you're feeling drained and there's a lack of reciprocity, so that you can be sure you're not overextending and gather your energy and depart so that you can recharge and refill. And then there's the undermining boundary. I don't know what else to call this, but this is like when somebody says, oh, you changed your hair. It's different. It's like a backhanded compliment. It's not really a compliment. It's like a takeaway. Or, I really like you in yellow, but green is my favorite color on you. I'm using like really simple examples, I guess you could say, but you get what I'm saying. Like, it's like they give you kind of a compliment and then they tear you down a little bit. And so that's an undermining boundary. So, and this is where it can get really confusing with friends or acquaintances when somebody's behaving that way. And you have to either remove yourself from the situation, not comply with this other person in terms of like an ongoing relationship, or you have to say, that actually hurts my feelings. That's not very kind. Or you just say these really honest, blunt, forward feelings. I think we just lack honesty. We are not being honest with each other. And I'm not talking about being a total meanie, I'm not talking about I'd like to swear a lot more than I do. I'd like to mention that. But I try to keep these episodes clean so that if you're a parent with kids, listening, you can still have the show on in the background. Like, I try to be really conscientious of that. But sometimes I do want to swear. So I'm going to say meanie instead of a-hole. But, if someone's just craving being mean, people aren't mean just to be mean. People are mean because they're suffering. And that's not an excuse for people to act that way, right? That's just a fact. And so you either have to remove yourself from the situation or be okay with being honest. And you don't have to be mean. Honesty doesn't have to be mean, and you don't have to harmonize it or make it more peaceful either. But if you're coming from a heart-centered place and you say, you know what, that really hurt my feelings. I don't like it when you say that. Or, things like that. You're being honest and you're putting up your boundary for the undermining. And then this one is like the most important. Well, no, they're all important, but this is like incredibly important. This changed my life. A spiritual boundary. So a spiritual boundary is, especially when you have been working on your intuition or your clairsenses, or you're hyper aware, hyper vigilant, and you're having these experiences often in the spiritual realm. Maybe dead people are showing up. Maybe ancestors are coming through. Maybe spirit spirit guides are talking all the time. Maybe you're constantly getting a download, whatever the thing is. This one literally changed my life. And this began with my spiritual mentor, Heather. And the first thing that I remember talking to her about was that I wasn't able to get any sleep because I would constantly hear the voices of my spirit guides. And because everything was so quiet and everyone was sleeping, I was able to even expand my feelers, quote unquote, intuitively, several blocks away, even in my neighborhood. So it was like I was constantly scanning for the threat, which is also a traumatic response for people that are having that happen. But I remember her saying, just tell them you're sleeping, put a sign on the door. Like, I'm asleep. I don't want to work. I don't want to hear anything. I don't want to be a part of anything. I want like restorative rest. And I was like, it's that simple? And she's like, yeah. And I was like, okay, I'll try it. So I didn't physically put a sign up, but I did it mentally and in my heart and in my mind. And I stated my intention, when I went to sleep. And this is why I talk about having a PM spiritual practice, an AM and a PM spiritual practice, but some kind of practice where you close out the day. And then you're able to set intentions for the night. So, I would say something along the lines of, I'm asking for deep restorative rest tonight. I don't want to work. I don't want to leave my body. I don't want to travel outside of my body. I want to sleep and have very deep sleep and be fully embodied. I would say something like that. And it really did make a difference. And then I remember when I had my first spiritual experiences where a passed on loved one from a client that I had dealt with earlier in the day at work showed up at my house. I was doing the laundry and I had a laundry basket in my hand. I remember this as clear as day. And she showed up in my hallway and I like walked through her and I threw the laundry in the air and I freaked out. And I'm like, what are you doing here? I knew who she was. And she was actually my client was someone that I knew the woman that had showed up in my house. So I said, what are you doing here? And she said, I want you to give this to my daughter as a gift, pointing at something I had made, some jewelry that I had made in my spot, my spiritual room where I make all my products and stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, what? Like, that costs so much to make. I have to like sell it so that I can, make the profit or whatever. Well, and she just asked me, she said, I just want you to give this to my daughter. And her daughter was who I had seen, previously in the day. I was like, okay. So I brought it to work. I called the client and I said, your mom, wants you to have this. And the mom had told me to tell her that she could connect to her while holding that. It would be like a spiritual anchor to her mom or to communicate with her mom. And so I gave it to her. And most of the stones in what I had made was red. Well, the whole thing was red. And there was only a couple pieces that weren't red. And red, signifies that first family experience, our primal power, our connection to our first family, and also our second family that we create as adults. And so it was a really powerful symbolism. And I cried and my client cried. But I later realized like how affected I was. It's like I was at home, I was doing laundry, and there should be boundaries there spiritually. I shouldn't be at home and being, cortisol shooting out of my body because some ghost essentially shows up in the middle of my hallway. And so, although that was divine and amazing and well needed, I then started setting intentions for my house. I had a house blessing and a house clearing, but I also, just made it very clear in my daily prayers and intentions like, this is my sacred space. This is my home. When I'm home, I'm not working. When I'm home, I'm not engaging with spirit. And some people might disagree with this. They might say, oh, no, you have this ability or whatever's happening for you, this awareness. Why wouldn't you share it? Because when you're working 24 hours a day, you're exhausted, you're overextended, you're tired, you can't repair, you can't heal, and then you can't do a good job when you do have clients. So it's a spiritual boundary about setting intentions with your house. So maybe you can't get a house blessing and a house clearing, but the daily energetic hygiene of your house should be your intentions. Like, this is what I allow in here. This is what I don't. This is the energy I want in my home. This is the energy I don't want in my home. So simply by stating your intentions creates a spiritual boundary. You have free will, and every day that you wake up is a brand new day, so you can re-engage this free will. And then I learned to also turn off and on, kind of like a light switch attached to my intuition, my hyper awareness, so that it wasn't on when I was just hanging out with friends or family or doing the laundry, doing things like that. So there's lots of boundaries that you can create with your spiritual team, with the energy that you allow in your home, with the energy that you allow in your energetic atmosphere. What are you allowing to take up space spiritually in your energetic atmosphere? What do you want in there? What do you not want in there? That's your own space. You can kick it out. It doesn't have to be in there. You just state your intentions. You be clear about what your intentions are. And essentially, the reason why we even have to do that is that spirits are not in a human body. They don't know what it's like. They're not in a human body. They are limitless, right? And we have limits. We have body limits, mental limits, emotional limits. We have all these limits in this dense physical experience. And so they don't. So we have to kind of instruct them. Like I assumed that they would all know what my highest good was. And that's why I was working so much, 24 hours a day. And they don't. They're going to push and push and push, and they're going to continuously engage with you until you enforce what your boundaries are and say, okay, I will speak to you when I do this and this during these times, and I want this and I don't want this. Like you just do it whatever you want. That's going to be very unique and individual to each person. But know that you need to put a spiritual boundary up with your ancestors, with your spirit guides, with your allies, with wherever you spiritually anchor, put up that boundary. So I hope that gives you some things to digest and to think about: your yes no boundary, your self care boundary, your spiritual boundaries, undermining boundaries, fear boundaries, all the different boundaries that we talked about today. Gives you a little bit of an idea of where to kind of track yourself and see where you might be able to implement new boundaries and improve your boundaries so that you feel better. So let's head into the collective reading for each astrological sign. So this is a collective reading. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't, allow it to settle, and see what shows up for you, if anything, throughout the rest of the week. But also, this applies at any time that you listen to this episode. So this is not a reading based on the current time that I'm publishing this episode. So this is for each astrological sign, guidance and illumination for boundaries. And know that every person's reading, every sign that we're doing, will have some nugget of wisdom for everyone else that's listening when it's not your sign. So we're going to start with Aries at the beginning of the zodiac signs. And for this reading, I worked with the Rebecca Campbell, the Work Your Light Oracle card deck. I did work with some Affirmator decks and some Oracle decks, so I'll tell you which ones I'm pulling from. But what I like to do with my readings is I'll pull the card, I'll read the book meaning if there is one, but I'll also see like how it feels, what the colors are, what the themes are, and then I'll open myself up to the intuitive, interpretation that's coming through, or the channeling of the information coming through. So for Aries, for boundaries, how to support and deepen your boundaries, we pulled the transformation card, and it just talks about things are changing at a cellular level. Deep healing is occurring for you. So to really improve and deepen and strengthen your boundaries, you want to release the old ways of being that have kept you in fight, flight, or freeze, and choose a new way of being where trauma is not the driving force. Heal your childhood patterns and be observant. Don't attach. So when you're dealing with boundaries, really watch where you're being triggered and how you're being triggered, especially in other people's boundaries with you. And be more of an observer rather than a reactor. Respond rather than react. So don't be attached to the outcome of how the boundaries are going. Just be an observer of that. Be a witness to that. Moving on to Taurus, we're using the deck called Affirmators, Love, and Relationship. This is an affirmation deck. I like to work with affirmation decks just like I work with Oracle. And this card for Taurus was acceptance. So accept things as they are, accept others as they are, accept others' uniqueness, and don't expect anything. Accept, not expect, and allow boundaries to be without expectations of others. So you just engage your boundaries and you consistently hold those boundaries and not worry about how other people is responding to your boundaries, but also don't expect them to do the same. Don't expect them to have boundaries. This is about staying in your own lane and just accepting what is, and then holding your own boundaries without expectation. Moving on to Gemini, we got the new moon in Capricorn. This is from the Moonology deck by Yasmin Bolin. Your hard work is paying off. It's time for a fresh start. Make a plan with boundaries. Don't wing it. Be disciplined and don't try to control others. Avoid controlling people. So for you, you're going to need to have a plan. You're going to need to continuously return to the plan to be able to engage those boundaries really successfully. Moving on to Cancer, we got the Anna, grandmother of Jesus, from the Rebecca Campbell Work Your Light Oracle deck. So this is seeding light, laying foundation, and a divine plan. So we all have a part to play in the divine plan. No one is more worthy than the other. Don't compare yourself to others. Investigate more about yourself. What do you even like? Where do you even want your boundaries? So avoid the comparison and realize that there is an innate wisdom in yourself that will help you align your boundaries. Moving on to Leo, you are healing. So this is from the Chris Carr deck, Crazy Sexy Love Notes by Chris Carr. I love this deck. It's so pretty. Well, I like all these decks, but this one really has some really beautiful artwork. So you are healing. You can't force boundaries. You can only uphold and engage them. Don't beat yourself up. You're doing really deep healing by having these boundaries. So this also kind of came through in the channeling to soften in areas where boundaries might be a little too rigid. So this is for the Leo. So think about where these boundaries are that need softening and where they need deepening. All right, so for Virgos, be gentle with yourself. This again is from the Chris Carr Crazy Sexy Love Notes deck. Don't push yourself so hard. Rest, renew, be gentle. Boundaries become a sole focus for you, like a job. So don't allow yourself to be at work all the time when you're working on boundaries. Take breaks and realize that if you have a consistent system or a way that you can track and align yourself, you can sort of soften into that rather than have it be at the foremost focus all the time. It's not about getting it right. It's about doing what feels good. So remember that. Moving on to Libra. We actually got the card that says boundaries for the Libra. So this is the Rebecca Campbell Work Your Light deck. Where do you need to establish better boundaries? Saying no is an actual spiritual act. When you say yes, you give unconditionally. Clear boundaries with others allows them to know where you stand, and this avoids resentment and confusion. So check your belly. Your gut is your second brain. For the Libras, the message was to listen to your gut, listen to your belly, and to say yes when you want to say yes and no when you want to say no to help you establish those really great boundaries. For the Scorpios, we got the full moon from the Moonology deck by Yasmin Boleyn. Surrender to the divine, forgive to release. So let go of the past, keep your cool, establish and maintain boundaries so that you can be unattached to how others perceive them. That's not your problem. That's not your energy. That's theirs. So all you have to do is establish your boundaries and maintain them and be completely unattached to how others perceive you. And this is going to be really challenging for the Scorpios. You are looking for that reaction or that response, right? And so you have to be able to just put out your boundaries, let go, forgive, release, keep your cool, and maintain your boundaries, being completely unattached to how people respond to them.
Okay, so moving on to Sagittarius. I am using the deck called Affirmerators, and somebody gave me this deck as like a joke deck, and I end up using it in readings often because it brings comedy into the reading, and sometimes comedy is what's needed. And it makes me laugh, and it makes whoever I'm reading for laugh. And so I really like this. So for the Sagittarius, we pulled the card that's titled Friendliness. Whenever I smile, I make someone's day better. What a cool way to buy happiness for free. Today, I will remember what an awesome power I hold, and I'll take joy in improving lives simply by giving away grins like crazy. So I guess for you Sagittarius is you're going to uphold your boundary and then seal it with a smile. Seal it with a warm energy. And this is not a going out of your way and overextending energy. This is simply just who you are and how you like to do things. So you put down your concrete boundary with a smile. And you can think of your smile as sealing the deal, sealing the energy.
Moving on to Capricorn, we're using the Chris Card deck again. Listen to your body. Bodies always work to create health and vitality. Meet your body halfway and act on the messages that you get. Listen to your gut feelings, whether it's a whisper or a roar. Listen to them. For boundaries for you might be more of an intuitive thing. So you're just noticing and paying attention to how your body's responding. Moving on to Aquarius, we have the Abundance card from the Affirmator deck. Boundaries may seem limiting for you, but you deserve to receive in a healthy and reciprocal way. So don't fear your boundaries as a possible loss. See it as a gain. See it as attracting that energy that you want by having boundaries. And lastly, we pulled for Pisces, we pulled the dance card from the Chris Carr deck. Move your body, release tension, sweat out your prayers, twirl your intentions. Boundaries may be more fluid for you, but know where your hard line yes and no stops are. Think about it while dancing, moving, or swimming, and realize that boundaries are changeable and they are fluid, and they don't have to be black and white for you Pisces. Everyone's different and you have to do what works for you. Okay, well, that's it. I hope that you enjoyed the collective readings and learned or gained something along the way. Thank you for listening to the Flowering Daydream podcast, where daydreams become reality. I'm your host, Charlene Windus, and you can find me on Udemy, Insight Timer, and my website, charlenewindus.com, where you can find my energy sprays, candles, bath bombs, rollers, as well as distance healing sessions, mentoring sessions, and coaching sessions. May your spring be filled with vibrant new beginnings, blossoming ideas, abundant love, and blessings.